Michael Becker specializes in international human rights law at Trinity College in Dublin and joins me from Dublin. Michael, thanks for being on the program. Talk about the merits of South Africa's case. How hard is it for South Africa to prove what is happening in Gaza is in fact genocide?
Well, that is the question that lies at the heart of the case on the merits, and that's a question that the International Court of Justice is not going to decide for a very long time. So it's really important to understand that the hearings taking place this week are specifically about those emergency measures, or what the court calls provisional measures. And there, South Africa has to meet a much lower standard than it's going to have to meet on the merits. In terms of the merits of the case, even in situations where you have mass atrocity, even in situations where you have very serious violations of international law, that doesn't necessarily mean that a situation also can be characterized legally as genocide. And there, the real difficulty for South Africa when this case goes ahead is going to be that difficult question of proving genocidal intent.
Well, talk about also another very significant word in all this, and that is intent, based on Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention.
Right. So the evidence that South Africa has put forward so far, and that it will surely develop in much greater detail as the case goes forward, really tries to get at this question of intent from two directions. So on the one hand, South Africa today went through the evidence relating to what is happening on the ground. So that's painting this picture of the absolutely catastrophic, dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, brought about by what South Africa would describe as indiscriminate or reckless bombing, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, schools, housing, and so forth. Now, South Africa is going to pair that evidence, which it says points to and can only lead to an inference of genocidal intent, with these very problematic statements that have come from the highest levels of the Israeli government, which South Africa says directly point to genocidal intent, an intention to completely wipe out, to physically destroy the Palestinian population of Gaza.
You brought up a very good point, and let me read you some of those inflammatory comments made by Israeli officials, people within the Israeli government, including Israel's President Isaac Herzog. In October, he said, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible," suggesting that all citizens of Gaza, Michael, are responsible for the Hamas October 7th attack. Itamar Ben-Gvir, a member of the Knesset, they're all terrorists and they should be destroyed. And Nissim Vaturi, another right-wing Israeli politician, we all have one common goal: erasing Gaza from the face of the earth. Can these statements be used as evidence for South Africa to solidify its case?
Well, that's certainly what South Africa is going to do. And part of what they showed in their presentation today in the first round of the hearings was to show that those statements are actually being taken up by soldiers on the ground, that rhetoric isn't just mere rhetoric, but is actually being kind of implemented as policy. Now, tomorrow, when Israel has its chance to lay forth its defense for the first time in the case, I'm sure quite a bit of time is going to be spent explaining why at least some of those comments, maybe not the ones you just mentioned, but some comments have been taken out of context, that some comments don't refer to the Palestinian population as a whole, but are specifically directed at Hamas, or have been made by individuals whose views can't be attributed to the state of Israel itself. So we will see Israel do what it can to distance itself from those statements, but it certainly is a problem for Israel, and it gives South Africa a body of evidence that we don't always see in cases invoking the Genocide Convention.
So talk about the definition of genocide, Michael. What does that mean exactly?
Right. So the convention describes genocide as certain acts undertaken with the intent to physically destroy a protected population group in whole or in part. And in this case, that protected population group is the Palestinian population of Gaza. But that's where we get this idea of genocidal intent from. You have to be intending not to kill individual members of the group. It's this idea that you want to physically destroy the entire group through killing members of the group, or by causing situations of serious bodily or mental harm, or, and this is very important for this case, creating conditions of life that essentially are meant to destroy the group as a whole. So that's where we get into the evidence relating to the fact that Israel has completely cut off Gaza from food, electricity, water, medical supplies, and so forth. It's this indirect creation of the conditions that could lead to widespread famine, widespread disease, and result in significant loss of life that can also fall within that definition of genocide.
So, Michael, my last question to you is, can this court actually stop Israeli action? I mean, whatever this court decides, even with South Africa's calls for some kind of emergency measures, they can't force Israel to do anything, can they?
Well, that's true. ICJ decisions are legally binding, but the ICJ itself, like many courts in many different situations, can't itself go out and enforce its decisions. It has to rely on other actors, other parties to do that. So if the court goes ahead, and I'm skeptical that the court will actually direct Israel to suspend military operations entirely as South Africa has requested. But I do think the court will try to address it in some way. That might mean directing Israel to ensure that any military operations going forward are consistent with Israel's obligations under international law, including the Genocide Convention. Now, what will that mean in terms of enforcement? We've already heard from Israel that they plan to reject anything that the court might say. And when this decision comes out, it won't surprise me at all when we hear that again from Israel. But even if Israel publicly disavows whatever the court might come up with, that doesn't necessarily mean that behind the scenes, it won't have some impact on how Israel goes about planning its strategy and conducting itself.
All right.
It may also cause other states to bring pressure on Israel in new and different ways, including Israel's closest allies.
And again, a reminder that Israel will present its case and defend itself against those allegations on Friday. Michael Becker, thank you very much.